At some point in your English journey, you may be asked to complete an IELTS academic test. Now, sometimes when we are practicing writing by ourselves, it can be so difficult to pay attention in what is it that I could do to improve what I'm describing here. And this is what today's video is about. We're going to take a look at one sentence and analyze how we can get it from a beginner level to an advanced level. Are you ready? Let's get started with today's quest in the category of rules. So here we are with our quest for today. We're going to take a look at the IELTS task number 1. We're going to take a look at one data point and we're going to analyze it from different stages of difficulty. As our theory for our basis here, we're using the 5 stages of language acquisition, and then we have pre-production, early production, speech emergence, intermediate fluency, and advanced fluency. If you don't remember them now, and if you didn't take notes, don't worry, we're going to be taking a look as we go. So what we have here, what we got as our graph, what we have in terms of tax. The graph shows the proportion of the population aged 65 and over between 1940 and 2040 in 3 different countries. So what you see there circled in the red is the data point that we're going to be working on today. So if you notice, you have the thinner line that represents the population of Japan, and you can see that the line itself is pretty much reaching more than the 25%. So 25% is the line, the maximum there is 30. So in between, in the middle, we will say that it is the 27.5 if you want to make the reference, but it's just kind of below that. So we can say that is almost 27. So let's work with the number 27 for this time. So let's take a look at what we consider in terms of the first stage that we are going to talk about. So if you notice, we're starting with stage number 2, which is called early production. So stage number 1 is called pre-production. So it is a process that we are listening a lot more to the language and we're not necessarily producing. So we're not going to take that stage into consideration for our exercise. So we're going to start right up to stage number 2, early production for beginner speakers. So this is also coming from a perspective of someone who's not trying to translate the information. They're basically working with the words and expression that they know based on what they heard in movies, TV shows, etc. So in this particular case, the sentence that we would have would be 2040, old people is 27 big in Japan. So in this particular sentence construction, I can identify the pieces of information, but they are not accurately connected when we talk about the English sentence construction. We do have some good indications that the student is starting to take a look at sentence construction, because if you look at the verb is, it's accurately positioned into the sentence structure of subject, verb, and object. There could be definitely a lot of improvements to be made, but you can see that people are starting to put those words into a logical order in a sentence that starts to reflect what we expect in English. So after we go through the process of being with early production or beginner speakers, we can go into stage number 3 when we talk about speech emergence. Now, for speech emergence, we have quite of a spectrum or a range of skills. On transitioning from beginner into this stage, we will have the sentence, in 2040, Japanese old people are bigger in Japan. So we see some interesting changes here. For example, we have the inclusion of the preposition in before ears. We also have the inclusion of an adjective in its comparative form. And you can see also some accurate phrase building, especially when you have, for example, old people with an adjective and a noun, and also in Japan with a preposition in the country. So you can really see the progress when it comes to how the speaker starts to express themselves with more accuracy. So still into the speech emergence, it's still in this speech, but the more we practice and the more we learn with our mistakes, we can get into what we call the intermediate level with an expression of a sentence that would be something like this. In 2040, the number of old people is 27% bigger in Japan. So in this case, we start to see that not necessarily just the individual specific person that we're referring when we say old people, which is still not necessarily it's not the most appropriate word choice for us to make in this context. It's not polite, it's not something that we would say in any kind of social conversation if we would not want to sound rude or that we didn't know the more modern types of language that we would use to describe people who would be age 65 and over. So in this particular case, we still have some inappropriacies in terms of word choice, but we do see a more accurate representation of the sentence structure, especially when it comes to talking about a point of data and reflecting that in the sentence structure. So once you go over this point, and this here is a point that when learners achieve this level of the intermediate conversation, it's very much possible for you to navigate day-to-day situations like going to the grocery store, taking a course, or going for an exercise class or anything like that. But in terms of what we would expect for someone who is going to college and university, we'd still need to have a deeper development of sentence structure. And then in this case, we will go into the higher end of our speech emergence when learners are transitioning from a speech emergence to the next level, which would be the intermediate fluency. So in this case, we have the sentence: in 2040, the older population will be approximately 27% higher in Japan. Now, we see a lot of great changes in this case. Most importantly, the accurate use of punctuation when we're using the comma. We have more accurate phrase building and longer phrase building. The older population, this is one phrase. It's one combination of words that work together as one unit of information. We also have the adverb approximately being used in an accurate way as well. And we also have the change of adjective, in this case, using higher. So definitely in the higher, let's say, range and level of complexity in sentence structure for an intermediate student. Now, what happens in this particular case for many of us when we are able to communicate in this level and we don't have the habit of challenging ourselves, for example, this is what can cause us to plateau. When we're not taking a look at more difficult types of texts, we are not fostering reading in our routine, and that can happen quite frequently. For people who are not necessarily interested in investing in higher education, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem. But then if you want to invest in activities in life that will require more linguistic complexity, then we do have to challenge ourselves every day. So you see here that it's a pretty good sentence in this case, something that could easily be put and written very well by anyone. So we would achieve here a very good level of proficiency and fluency in English language. On the next part of this, we would have what we call stage 4 in the 5 stages of language acquisition, which is called intermediate fluency. Now, here we have more accurate description of data, and we also have longer phrases as well. We have some dominance of the use of inversions here with the use of apostrophe S. So in this case, we have the sentence: in 2040, the Japanese elder population will rise to more than 25% of the country's population. Here, what is interesting in terms of high intermediate is that sometimes when we learn to create more complex or more sophisticated sentences, we can also fall into some of the traps of advanced writing or high intermediate writing. In this case, we have the repetition of the word population. So at the same time that it shows a high level of accuracy, good demonstration of use of not only accurate representation of data, but also inversions. All of those are very good construction, but you see that it's not necessarily something that requires perfection because we do fall into some of the more advanced traps. So this would be one representation of what we have of a student who's in high intermediate or intermediate fluency, that they're taking more risks when it comes to more accurate representation of data in the written form. So it's a pretty good stage to be. And then once we go into our master's degree or something that is in higher education in many different levels, we basically are working with a high level of dominance and accuracy when we talk about the language. But how could we go higher or more complex than this? Well, the following stage, what we have after intermediate fluency in stage number 5, is called advanced fluency. And in this case, the speaker has enough dominance of the language that they can demonstrate creativity and flexibility in sentence construction and phrase building as well. So in this case, we have two different sentences as examples of advanced fluency when we are describing that data point. The first one, by 2040, the Japanese elderly will have risen to over 25% of the total population. The second example, by 2040, the proportion of Japanese elderly is expected to increase to nearly 27%. Now you see here that when we talk about how we represent and how we write about data, it's not necessarily that there's just one way to do it. There are many different ways to do it. But what's important for us to do is that we can accurately represent ideas of time and build the correct relationships between the phrases and the clauses within the sentence. If you notice some of the differences here, key differences in this case, I may add, the first one is the change from the preposition in 2040 to by 2040, which establishes a more complex relationship with time. So I'm not saying that when we arrive in 2040, that's something that happens at that particular time. I want to say and express that this is a movement that has been happening, and when we arrive at the point of 2040, that number is a number that we're going to reach. So it establishes a difference with our reference of time. In this particular case, we can think about before the mark of 2040. So it's something that happens, and when we arrive at 2040, when talking about time, the population is at that rate that was at that proportion that was shown in the graphic. So the first thing that we have is the difference of preposition. The second one that we have will be the changing verb tense. The first example, we have future perfect simple with will have risen. And then on the second example, we have is expected to increase. Now, in this particular case, we're also making a prediction with a different type of structure. And then after that, we have different phrases that were built, for example, to over 25% of the total population. Total population is also another example of a phrase. On the second sentence, we have expected to increase, which is the correct pattern that we have for gerund and infinitive. And we also have the phrase to nearly 27% with the adverb being used accurately as well. So these are basically some examples of visual representation of data that basically help us navigate from the beginner to advanced level of proficiency and fluency. Now, what do you think? What were some of your surprises? Were you able to guess what we had in terms of different suggestions? What is your suggestion? What sentence would you make? Put it in the comments. Please don't forget to subscribe. But everyone, we've got it. We've made it. We've learned how to get one sentence in a beginner level and transform it into an advanced level based on an IELTS task number 1 type of quest. Congratulations for this quest, for this pretty much this achievement that we've all had together. We should all have a little bit of achievement. I'm gonna make some achievement animations as well. But everyone, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed. Please leave me a comment telling me some of your opinions related to these videos, and I see you next Tuesday for our next video of Second Nature English. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.